Hello and welcome. Today we are diving into one of the most discussed symptoms on the internet today, and that's bloating. We're going to start this conversation a little different though. We're going to dive into the reasons you might be bloated that have nothing to do with food, because food is not the only culprit when it comes to triggers for bloating. And many of these that we're going to discuss are really simple tweaks to your routine that can make a very significant difference in symptoms. Now, I want to start off with a little context on what bloating is. So bloat often occurs when there's distension in the abdomen or stomach area. It can often be due to excess gas production from the microbiome, but can also be from inflammation and stress and other causes. Bloating often occurs in the low belly area, so such as like around the belly button or below the belly button, but it can also occur for some people in the upper abdomen, even expanding from the upper abdomen, like the ribs, all the way to the low belly. So we want to distinguish, though, between kind of chronic bloating and occasional bloating. So occasional bloating that occurs, maybe just once in a while, if it's once every couple of weeks, or maybe after a night out eating and drinking. Those can often be due to isolated triggers that are more situational and maybe not something to get too worked up about. But if you experience more chronic bloating, which is happening certainly daily or maybe several times a week, or is very extreme in the level of distension that occurs, this is something to get a little bit more curious about, as chronic bloating can be common, but it's definitely not normal. So we do want to make one more clarification that there's a difference between this chronic bloating and normal expansion of the stomach after a full meal. So normal expansion, part of how our body's appetite signals work, is expansion of the stomach organ to tell our brain and our hunger satiety cues that we're good. We got physical food in the stomach. So there's a little bit of expansion. What we are really speaking to today is kind of going above and beyond that just small amount of expansion. You shouldn't have to unbutton your pants. They should be, unless your pants are incredibly, incredibly tight to begin with, which, is a look for some of us. So, it should be that you can still be comfortably fitting in your clothes. Maybe they just feel slightly a little bit more tight, but certainly not restrictive or the need to unbutton. So we just want to be mindful that there is a difference between this kind of chronic distension bloating and kind of normal just expansion of food. But either way, if you're someone that even occasionally finds yourself bloated, or you experience more of this chronic bloating, the strategies that we're going to dive into today are really helpful for all situations. So we really bring this idea, this bloating concept, because Jillian and I hear this so much, particularly from clients that are reaching out to work with us, really about their view on if they're experiencing bloating, the conclusions that they jump to of the things that need to happen. Like, Jilly, I feel like you were just sharing an example of some clients that you had talked to and kind of some of the things that they were saying and the solutions that they were looking for, pretty extreme.
Yeah. So we were just talking about how on introductory calls with potential clients, we will often have women, kind of reaching out that are dealing with, chronic bloating, chronic distension, a lot of discomfort after meals, women that will say that, they look, 6 months pregnant at the end of the day after just eating, normal, consistent meals. And when I'm having conversations with these women, they are often asking for support with, what do I cut out? What is good for me to eat? What should I avoid? And there is a fixation on just food. And we're really, really zoomed in on the food factor. And food itself can be a piece of the puzzle in terms of what's contributing to bloating, which Abby and I are going to talk a lot more about at a future episode. But there's usually a lot more to the story in terms of what is driving bloating and other digestive symptoms and discomfort. So we will often say that food itself is not the problem. It's the environment that food is going into. We very much understand the knee-jerk reaction of wanting to blame food, especially if we, eat a meal and we don't feel well after and we're experiencing a lot of significant bloating and distension. It makes sense, in terms of how our human brains work, that we would kind of want to look at what just happened in terms of, what we put in our body. But there's a lot more to the story. And that's really what we want to kind of talk about today, because we really see these non-food pieces of the puzzle being very, very neglected and ultimately kind of keeping people stuck. And something else I will say outwardly is that, I've worked with a lot of women, and I know Abby has too, that have worked with a variety of other providers, conventional providers, functional providers. They've done all sorts of extensive testing. They've tried tons of supplements, elimination diets, and they are not getting better. Maybe they saw a little bit of improvement, but they're still dealing with chronic bloat and, possibly other digestive symptoms as well. And when we get into things, it's very common for me to find that no one has ever talked to these, individuals about these non-food factors that are so essential for, kind of the gut healing process.
Yeah. And I think it's because there's not the sex appeal to it, of like, yeah, let's give you a list of foods and let's like demonize these other foods and really make it feel like there's a quick fix that, it's just stop doing, just don't do. And that's really the perspective that, really what brought this topic up was like so much of the energy that we hear from clients is like, what can I stop doing? What can I eliminate? What can I cut out? What can I, banish? And it's that desire to restrict that is really fueling a lot of these conversations, when we want to start with, hey, maybe it's just the environment and we just need to kind of make some tweaks that can make a really significant, impact. And food, again, as Jilly was saying, like can play a role, but really the environment of it. We're going to clarify what we mean when we say environment. But I'll also have male clients that, will struggle with bloating too. I would say it's probably not as common as our female clients. Digestive issues tend to be just more common in women than in men in general. But not to, if you're male listening to this podcast, like congratulations first, you're wiser for it. But certainly, it can happen in both men and women. All right. So Jilly's going to take it away with some of our non-food bloating triggers.
So first up, we have eating hygiene, or to put it more simply, how you are actually eating food. Now, to Abby's point, this is definitely not the sexiest or most exciting thing to talk about. But how you eat has a significant impact on digestion and is one of the most overlooked pieces. So in order to have a healthy microbiome, we need to support digestion first. Digestion specifically is the process of mechanically and chemically or enzymatically breaking down food into smaller substances that can then be absorbed into the bloodstream and used by the body. If there is a breakdown in any step of the digestive process, which is a really kind of complex process, this can have a ripple effect leading to immediate digestive symptoms and discomfort and bloating after eating, but it can also lead to bigger issues and have bigger implications for the gut microbiome and sort of the balance of microbes in the gut and the gut lining, which we'll talk a bit more about. So let's talk about some of the really important aspects of digestion that we are often seeing overlooked that are possibly driving your bloating. So digestion starts in the brain. When we are preparing our food, when we're seeing our food, we're smelling it, thinking about it, touching it. These are all really important pieces of the digestive process, which is not talked about often. And this kind of phase of digestion is referred to as the cephalic phase, the cephalic phase of digestion. So it's estimated that about 20% or up to 20% of digestive secretions are produced in the cephalic phase. And again, it's this phase of digestion that is happening before we even take a bite of food or food, is entering the body. So we're essentially producing these anticipatory digestive secretions that are prepping and priming the body for eating and optimally digesting and absorbing nutrients from food when we are, again, thinking about food, visualizing food, actually, seeing it with our eyes, smelling it, and really kind of engaging with the eating process as a whole. Interestingly, we do also produce some insulin and other hormones related to appetite regulation in the cephalic phase, which I find to be fascinating. But I think on a basic level in terms of supporting digestion, the fact that up to 20% of digestive secretions are being produced before we even take a bite, it's a pretty big deal.
And we can think of the difference between like the doorbell ringing and like Uber Eats or like somebody else like dropping the food off there. Your body's like, wait, we didn't get to prep. Like we didn't smell it, we didn't touch it, we didn't see it. It just like showed up, and then like we're ready to eat it. So there's an opportunity that we might be missing out when, that's also one of the benefits of like cooking and preparing food is like digestion starts in that point. And it's just fascinating too.
Oh my gosh, it's so interesting, and it's such a great point in terms of all of the convenience that we have with food around us, often now. And, those things can definitely be helpful and, a great tool in a pinch. But, we are missing out on some key opportunities to support digestion if there's no connection with actually, putting food together or, plating it. And if we think about our modern world, we are trying to do, 10 different things at once at all times. And a lot of us are, eating meals in front of the TV, glued to our phone while we're working, responding to emails, and basically focusing on everything else except for food and eating. So we're often very distracted. And, I am, guilty of this too. And by no means perfect. I always say to clients that eating hygiene and really focusing on being present, with your food and really kind of trying to minimize distractions to focus on eating. It's a practice. It is a very much an ongoing practice.
I mean, and I think to the next point that you're going to lead into is like, particularly when, I remember like we were doing a podcast episode like a couple months ago, and both of us, we were like kind of in a rush. We got like sweet green salads, and we're both sitting down like hauling through the meal, like talking, getting excited for the episode, but like not really focusing on this, just being like, we're hungry and we're going to record for a while and like we need to eat these salads. And literally after we recorded, both of us like, I have a stomach ache. And it's like, because, like salad takes a lot of work for the digestive system and for chewing, which you're going to talk about in a second. And it was like, not because we ate something that was like bad food for us or whatnot, but it's like, it was like we just weren't focusing. We were focusing elsewhere. We were rushing through it. Like, I just remember that so much. Both of us were like, oh, okay. I know exactly what happened here.
I'm laughing because I remember that so vividly too. And we were kind of like, hey, are you a little gassy or a little bloated, or is it just me?
We're like, oh, good, because we're both sitting here.
Yeah, perfect. All right, as long as we're in the same boat here. But yeah, we're not perfect either. But it's a really important thing to think about, and it's okay if it's an ongoing process or practice that you're working on in terms of maybe trying to minimize distractions and focus on the act of eating a little bit more so. And maybe that just starts with one meal a day where you can kind of shut down and just focus on eating. A tip that I always like to give clients is, particularly if you're someone that it feels a little bit uncomfortable to just focus on eating, and you're used to having a lot going on, maybe even just minimizing visual distractions. So shutting down the, kind of the social media and the computer and all of that. And maybe you throw on some music or an audiobook or a podcast. So there's something that you're listening to, but really your primary focus is the meal. And one other thing that I want to, point out about the story that Abby was saying with the sweet green salads and all of that. Something women will say to us often is, I eat so healthy. I eat all the healthy food and I am so bloated. I am so distended. And again, this sort of highlights the fact that it's not always what you are eating. And you could eat all the healthy, gut supportive, fibers and foods in the world, but if you're not supporting digestion, this can create a lot of issues. So just another thing to highlight there. So we have the cephalic phase of digestion, and next up we have chewing, also really sexy and exciting to talk about. But chewing or mastication, as we refer to it, is the only opportunity for mechanical digestion. Everything else in the digestive process from there is chemical. So chewing or mastication basically involves physically breaking down food into smaller particles in preparation for that chemical digestion. And if we are not chewing food thoroughly, we are likely swallowing, big, large hunks of food and food particles that are really hard for the body and the rest of the digestive system to, break down well. So we really want to think about that chewing piece in order to optimize the rest of the digestive process and to kind of reduce that digestive burden. So besides actually physically breaking down food or that mechanical digestion, chewing is also important for a few other reasons. So when we are chewing, this is going to increase the production of saliva and salivary enzymes like amylase, which is going to start breaking down carbohydrates or starches into sugars. And we also produce lingual lipase, which is going to start breaking down fats. So the enzymes in our saliva are actually starting to chemically digest our food, which is wild. And when we are chewing, we are also sending signals to the brain, and the brain is then communicating with other parts of the body. We're activating the vagus nerve. So when we're chewing, it supports vagus nerve activation that gets the body into a more relaxed state. We send more blood flow. The body sends more blood flow to digestive organs, and we really start to produce other types of enzymes as well in terms of stomach acid and pancreatic enzymes, bile. And the body is just really, really getting ready for, optimally digesting throughout this chewing mastication process. And I will confidently say that most people, myself included, it's a work in progress, do not chew their food well at all. A kind of a benchmark or something to experiment with in terms of how do I know if I'm chewing my food well is trying to aim to chew your food to baby food texture. So it's essentially mush, and just see how long it takes you and what the difference is in terms of how you normally chew to what it looks like to chew food to baby food texture. So just as a benchmark for, kind of assessing if you're chewing well or not. Something I will also mention is that if you are someone that drinks a lot of water with meals, this is something that can impact digestion in a few ways, but specifically in thinking about chewing, usually we end up cheating on chewing when we're drinking a lot of fluid with meals. So we don't feel as much of a need to chew our food when we can, wash everything down or wash those big food particles down with fluid. So maybe we try to mostly drink fluid away from meals, or we just sip on fluid so we can really focus on the act of chewing.
Yeah, chewing is definitely a under practiced tool, and like to chew to that consistency of baby food texture, like you might actually need to like take your food and like move it to the side of your mouth, do like a little swallow and then like move it back. Like it's not just this like, oh my God, I chewed and then like I just swallow. It's really a like practice of like, and a lot of our clients are like, oh my God, like it takes me like so long to eat now, but it's like, we want 20 minutes for like the conversation of our brain and our, belly essentially to be able to have those hunger satiety cues. And like, there's just a beautiful like conversation that's happening. Even the way that we're put together, like this is where like we like nerd out on these things of like our brain, like just it goes north to south. And we're built that like there's a purposeful way, like why we're constructed in the exact way and like why we have teeth in the location that we have them. Like, and when we start to think about it that way, you're like, oh, well, okay, yeah, obviously. And if we're getting like full, I think I've said this in another episode, maybe I said it in the last episode with Michelle, if you're seeing full food, like full pieces of like lettuce in your stool, like in the toilet, how did it get there? You didn't chew it.
You didn't chew it. Exactly. Yeah, it's chewing is just a really, really essential piece of the process. And I love that you pointed out kind of that 20-minute guideline, just another benchmark. How long does it typically take you to eat? If you're eating in 10 minutes, we're probably, skipping out on a few pieces of, supporting optimal digestion. So just a lot of opportunity here to be able to support this, north to south digestive process. And the last thing that I want to point out here in regards to eating hygiene or how we eat is the state that the body is in, specifically the nervous system, when we are eating. So we did a very extensive episode on stress in the nervous system in season 1. I believe it was episode 4. So if you want to do a deep dive, definitely check out that episode where we break this down more so. But the state that we are in when we are eating food has really significant implications for our body's ability to digest and absorb properly. In our modern world, a lot of us are operating in a chronic fight or flight state, or we are operating in a sympathetic state, which is considered our, fight or flight mode, or the fight or flight branch of the nervous system. And stress is really pervasive, and it doesn't have to be some extreme acute event for the body to perceive stress. And really, it could just be the grind of the day-to-day, things that you're going through with your to-do list and work stressors and deadlines and all sorts of things going on in the world. So stress is really pervasive, and it's actually much, I don't want to say harder, but it needs to be an active process in terms of getting the body into a more relaxed state. And the default now is often, operating in this fight or flight. So when we are in a fight or flight, digestion is one of the first things that is impacted. So when the body senses, that there is more stress present, we are not going to be able to optimally digest food. We'll talk more about stress in a minute, but just wanted to highlight that the state that we are in when we are eating is a big deal. So if we want to really optimize the digestive process, this can really look like just pausing for a minute, doing a quick body scan, checking in with yourself to assess, okay, what's my breathing like? Am I taking, short, rapid breaths from my chest? If I am, is there a way that I can kind of slow that down and maybe take a few deeper, slow belly breaths to kind of send signals to the brain that like, hey, I'm safe, and we're getting ready to digest and, need to prime ourselves for digestion. So doesn't have to be crazy. It just, takes a moment of mindfulness to check in and assess, where we're at so we can be in an optimal state or activate that, rest and digest parasympathetic branch of the nervous system.
Yeah. And I love, that idea of when we are in that stressed out state or just active state, we could, call it, is it's really hard for our mind to tell our mind to calm down. So that's where we go to the body. And that's why like breath is such a great tool. No one's even going to know you're doing it. And I have even some clients that'll be like, oh, shoot, I was halfway through the meal and then I forgot. And I'm like, well, just do it then. Like whenever you remember to start chewing or start breathing or like check in with yourself, like it's not too late. Even after a meal, you're like, okay, let me like down regulate now because you've got a couple hours that your body's going to continue to digest. So, the more we practice it, the stronger that muscle gets.
100%. And sometimes I'll even mention to clients, use your plate as a benchmark in terms of when about half of your meal is gone, because sometimes we need those external cues. When half of your meal is gone, maybe just check in with yourself, put your fork down and, take a breather. How fast are you eating? How well are you chewing? Do we need to slow it down a little bit and, give our body some time, to work through the rest of the meal? So it doesn't have to be a perfect process where you're, kind of getting into like perfect Zen mode or like, doing a meditation before you eat. We just really want to slow down, bring more awareness and find ways that we can make that work for you.
Yeah. The fork down is always helpful. I'm like, welcome to our episode all on chewing.
Yeah, I know, right? So we should move on from eating hygiene before this does become the eating hygiene episode. And hopefully, you've picked up some helpful tips here in terms of, focusing on food, chewing thoroughly, and trying to get the body into a relaxed state as, kind of a non-food strategy for bloating.
And it kind of rolls into our next topic of grazing or erratic meal timing. So our digestive system has a rhythm and a pattern to it that not only promote the proper breakdown of food that's going to reduce bloating, so very much what Jillian was just talking about in terms of all of the steps that are really happening for optimal digestion. But when we eat in alignment with that rhythm, it also allows for our gut to perform its own self-cleaning processes and motility that really happen between meals, which is really key for like long-term gut health and overall health, which is really fascinating. So if we are constantly grazing or snacking all day, we can impair the self-cleaning mechanism in the gut. And this self-cleaning mechanism is called the migrating motor complex. We like to call it the MMC for short. And the MMC helps to move debris and bacteria down and out of the gut. So it kind of moves things out of the small intestine, keeps digestion moving in that north to south direction, keeps everybody like happy and humming. And really, when it's moving optimally, it can reduce symptoms of bloating distension. And when it's not moving optimally, it can lead to symptoms like bloating and distension. So the key is that this MMC, this downward motility movement, only functions in between meals and overnight while we're sleeping. So that means that if we are constantly grazing and practicing erratic meal timing so that there's really always food and active digestion happening, our gut is not able to perform that self-cleaning mechanism, that MMC. It's not able to run it efficiently. And that's what's going to lead to the backup, the disruption, the breakdown in that self-cleaning mechanism and lead to that potential bloating, distension. We can even go further and get conditions like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, or SIFO when it's more fungal. So we can see it start to kind of snowball into bigger conditions. And this is really where, hey, let's get out of the woods with bloating, but also let's really support long-term digestive health. So this is a major reason, why we really talk about like eating regular meals that will provide 3 to 4 hours of satiety. And that 3 to 4 hours of comfortable satiety. So we're feeling good. We're like satisfied after our meal. And then like at that like 2.5, 3 hour, 4 hour mark, you're like, oh, what's for lunch? Like I'm starting to think about food again. That's what that kind of should feel like. So we know we're eating like robust meals, but not only from a blood sugar appetite comfort standpoint, it's also because there's really powerful mechanisms that are happening in the gut that we need those pauses in between. So when we practice more regular eating patterns every kind of 3 to 4 hours, we're eating in alignment with our gut's natural rhythm, its natural pattern. And we're really supporting optimal digestion, and we're reducing frustrating symptoms like chronic bloating. And we love our rhythms and patterns. We're going to talk about how that rolls into here as well.
And to speak to kind of, what we often see in practice here too, sometimes when you are grazing and there is no structure, to meal timing and spacing, it's really hard to kind of understand the body's cues. And so, maybe this is something you could pay attention to. And if you observe that you are hungry, 2 hours after eating consistently throughout the day, that's probably an indicator that we need to add more to meals or snacks to be able to kind of lengthen the time between meals comfortably. And something I always like to point out when talking about the migrating motor complex is that biological hunger cues, hunger signals always trump any external rule. So if you listen to this episode and eat lunch and you're hungry an hour or two later, we do not want you ignoring that and saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to disrupt my MMC and, lengthening that time without actually, kind of putting some adjustments into place or taking action to make sure that we actually can comfortably sustain ourselves, with enough energy between meals. So be observational about this and not concerned about, one-off situations where, you were hungry a little bit sooner, than expected after a meal. So look at the big picture, kind of zoom out here. And, if you do observe that you're hungry really often or you're more of a grazer, just start to kind of slowly make adjustments and to, to build up those meals and to bring more structure to things.
That's like such a good point. Like kind of like using it as like a little light bulb. And because it could be that, maybe you did a really hard workout the day before or that morning and you're just like, oh, I'm hungrier and I'm maybe just underate. Maybe it's just not enough volume of food, maybe not enough protein, maybe not enough fiber. So it's like a little bit of like, let me take this nugget of wisdom. Let me feed my body because it's telling me I'm hungry. And then let me move on with my life wiser on the other side. Like kind of like as simple as that. Just like the little light bulb of like, oh, body, you're telling me something. I'm going to listen. I'm going to validate you. I'm going to feed you. And then I'm going to move on.
I love that. That's beautifully said. And this sort of speaks to kind of a big, I think part of why Abby and I started Your Body Has Your Back is because we really wanted to have these nuanced conversations and bring people back to acknowledging and listening to those inner cues in conjunction with the external knowledge and wisdom, and not relying solely on one or the other, and kind of using both of these to guide really supportive, decisions with diet and lifestyle. So next up, for non-food things causing bloating, we have chronic stress. I just mentioned a little bit about stress when I was talking about eating hygiene in terms of the importance of getting the body ideally into a more relaxed state to prepare the body for optimal digestion. But I want to speak to chronic stress a little bit more in terms of how this is not only impacting digestion, but the ripple effect that it can have on other aspects of gut health. So, chronic stress, I think we're all aware, is not a good thing. And when the body is in that more stressed out state, it is going to, suppress gastric secretion. So stomach acid, the pancreatic enzymes, it's going to impact bile, all of those things that we discussed that are needed to properly break down food. When we are in that stressed out state, it impairs motility and peristalsis. So food is not going to move through the digestive tract as efficiently, which can definitely contribute to bloating. And we get less blood flow, to digestive organs. So in an immediate sense, it is impacting and impairing digestion. Over time, chronic stress, which again, that chronic activation of the HPA axis and operating in that fight or flight mode, stress can also lead to more significant changes or biochemical changes rather with the gut. So newer research has found that chronic stress increases intestinal permeability. So that really important gut lining and the tight junctions that line the gut can become more permeable. This can certainly lead to immediate digestive symptoms, intestinal inflammation. Chronic stress also actually alters microbial balance, which I just think is super wild in terms of the balance of microbes in the gut. And specifically, research is suggesting that chronic stress is reducing microbial diversity. Microbial diversity, having healthy, diverse, robust, gut bacteria and gut microbes, really, really important in terms of, protecting the overall gut microbiome and having a resilient gut microbiome. When we reduce the diversity of microbes in the gut, we're also increasing susceptibility to pathogens and, things that we don't want, in the gut making a home. And kind of stirring up trouble. I feel like Abby probably has like a really good analogy
like those bullies.
For that. The bullies, the pathogens
yes,
of the
I
bullies.
often refer to the gut as a club. And if your gut's a club, we want a really strong bouncer. That's our secretory IgA, our immune system, because that's going to help to keep the bullies out, or the riffraff that aren't wearing the appropriate dress code and that are, coming in spilling like red wine on your white carpets and things. But that stress is what reduces the, quality of our bouncer and kind of causes, these bullies to be able to sneak in from like windows and, places that you're like, how'd you even get in here in the first place? So like protect your club. We have very bougie clubs. Mine's a very chic club, very white, no red wine.
I that's exactly how I would picture it. I love that. Abby has the best analogies ever. But it's, really important to kind of support that diversity. And it's not just about, again, the food that we eat and the fibers that we eat, which are key for supporting microbial diversity. But we can eat all those healthy, fibrous foods and get all the dietary diversity. But if the body is chronically assaulted by stress, this can, impact that balance. So really important there. And then chronic stress actually also can lead to intestinal inflammation and increased visceral hypersensitivity and perception of pain and discomfort. So the gut actually becomes more sensitive, and we experience, discomfort at sort of a higher degree when the body is under prolonged stress. So it's really, really interesting that there are a variety of ways that, stress can impact the gut. And I will say too, and we always like to be transparent here, there are things that we still don't fully understand or, know about the mechanisms for how, stress is impacting the gut. But we do know that it's a big deal. And some of this actually in newer research in terms of the culprits or sort of the main key players with what is having, the biggest impact on the gut is related to the corticotropin releasing hormones, which used to be called factors and now they're called hormones. But these corticotropin releasing hormones are hormones that regulate essentially the HPA axis. And so when the body perceives stress, these hormones basically stimulate the adrenals to produce things like cortisol. But when we have a lot of these, hormones floating around on a chronic basis, this is what causes that intestinal permeability, the inflammation, disrupts, mast cells, things like that. So there's some really interesting research coming out in this area, but we do need more, to kind of fully understand why all of this is happening.
And I think to that point too, I feel like we both get a good number of clients that come to us like eating, as they might describe, like really clean, really healthy. I'm the healthiest person, in my family, friend group, what have you. But they're the ones experiencing like this chronic bloating, or they're experiencing, pain, they're experiencing digestive symptoms. And that those are definitely the type, I was that person, where we think like stress is a big piece of this picture. And let's expand to like what could be chronic stressors outside of like the psycho-emotional, and really start to think about like where could other areas of stress be? And there certainly can be like disruptions to the microbiome and maybe bullies. And then it's like we've got that snowball that's gotten a lot bigger. So now we've almost got, now we have infection as a stressor and what have you. But I think if this resonates with anyone listening, definitely looking at the stressors and even thinking of things like blood sugar, like stress, and a lot of things that we covered in, previous episodes, because that definitely gives us some insight to saying like we're either feeding something that's imbalanced, or we're not really allowing for those proper mechanisms of digestion to really break down those like fibrous, nutrient-dense foods.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of us need to remember that stress is not just, the long to-do list or the deadline at work. And there are, there's external stressors and there's, internal stressors. And I think this is probably one of the biggest things. And I think you might agree, Abby, but I won't speak for you. But the overlooking of the physical stressors is a big deal in the clients that I work with.
I 100% agree. Yep.
Yeah. And this kind of moves us into our next point in terms of, something that we see being really disruptive, which is over-exercising, which is a physical stressor. And we've, talked a bit about this in the past as well, but, exercise is healthy, right? It's health promoting. And, we don't want to say that exercise isn't healthy, but the problem is the context. And if we are over-exercising, we're under-fueling, we don't have appropriate recovery. And exercise being a stressor, it's only healthy and supportive and adaptive if the body is in balance, or in homeostasis. So if we're overdoing it and we're overstimulating these stress hormones, it's going to have a significant impact on the gut. So we have to remember that stress is only a good thing in the right context. And if you feel like, okay, I'm checking the box with the eating hygiene and my meal spacing, maybe we need to take a look, and you're still experiencing bloating and other digestive symptoms, maybe we need to assess some of these physical stressors that are unrelated to.
Totally. And even with the, exercise piece, it could just be an experiment of saying, hey, I'm going to take the next 2 weeks to a month and really shift the way I'm going to continue moving, because that's a huge, motility driver. Like, if we want to move the body, but moving to walking, moving to lower intensity yoga, Pilates, weightlifting, if it's not, super extreme, like CrossFit type of weightlifting, and just kind of exploring, how does that feel in your body? How does that impact your digestion? How, lots of things that we can kind of get data. So it's always that curiosity.
Yeah, I love the idea of approaching things with curiosity and just being observational. I think it's easy to kind of beat ourselves up, or to be, rigid in how we're thinking about or approaching these things. So I think the word curious is so perfect in terms of let's just get curious, let's experiment and see how the body responds and what type of data it gives you. And it, to Abby's point, it's the recommendation is not to stop moving. But if you are experiencing chronic gut symptoms, chronic bloating, maybe we peel back a little bit and we see how the body feels with a different type of routine that is less cortisol stimulating.
Yeah. Because that exercise is very much like Goldilocks. I mean, we could, I guess on the flip side, if someone's not moving, if you have a very sedentary job and you're sitting kind of all day long, and then you kind of, drive to work, drive home, or don't leave the house because maybe it's, a lot of us are switched and working from home. We could experience bloating because of a lack of movement. So even doing 3 10-minute walks a day after meals can be a really great aid in getting some motility and some of that movement. So a little bit of thinking of that exercise as Goldilocks. Am I not doing enough, or am I doing too much? And that's always going to be kind of a continuous balance, and more a continuously shifting based on what season of life you're in, and what other stressors might be at play in your body and your life at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another big thing that kind of comes up here for physical stressors is sleep. So Abby, can you talk a little bit about sleep and bloating?
So, I mean, really, we could just say quality sleep is fundamental for every area of health. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But surprisingly, it's really important for digestion and quite frankly, reducing the potential for this chronic bloating. And not getting enough quality or quantity of sleep is a stressor on the body. And, Jillian shared so many ways that stress can impact the body, but in particular with sleep, we can see it leading to dysregulations in our cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and melatonin, which we might know as our sleep hormone, but both of those are actually very, very active in the gut. And they have a lot to do with the patterning and the rhythm of the gut. We talked about patterning and rhythm when we talked about that migrating motor complex. So there is a patterning and a rhythm to really everything in the body. And we want to be working in alignment with that. So when these are imbalanced, these hormone secretions, when they're imbalanced, these can lead to things like inflammation, breakdown of the gut barrier, or that leaky gut term, and can trigger bloating. We can also see sleep impacting blood sugar. Blood sugar is a driver of inflammation when it's imbalanced, and it can certainly impact our desire for certain foods, maybe leading to higher carbohydrate sugar foods. Those can be impacting the health of the microbiome, and that can lead to bloating. So, is it directly just the sleep, or the circumstance that then the sleep impacts in all of these other kind of domino effects in the body? And certainly if we're chronically experiencing sleep challenges, we can impact thyroid function. And that has a huge optimal thyroid function has a huge impact on gut motility. So the movement of food down and out. So that's where we can even get things like constipation. And we really want to be kind of supporting and strengthening certainly our thyroid, our metabolism, and sleep is a huge piece of that. So, ipso facto, decreasing bloating. So an even bigger conversation happening there. So just, a couple things when we think about sleep, what is quantity, what is quality? 7 to 9 hours of sleep, really consistent sleep and wake times, and being aware too of our light and dark exposure, which leads us perfectly into another non-food trigger, which has to do with that rhythm and patterning. Take it away, Jelly.
So last up here, we can't have this conversation without just, mentioning circadian rhythms. So, Abby and I did a really wonderful in-depth episode on circadian rhythms in season 1, which I would highly recommend checking out if this is of interest to you. But really as a quick refresher in terms of what circadian rhythms are physical, mental, behavioral changes that follow roughly a 24-hour cycle. So we have clocks in our brain. We have clocks all throughout our body that interact with our external environment and really essentially coordinate all of our internal biological processes like digestion. So basically, every cell, every organ in the body is, being primed by circadian rhythms to perform different tasks at different times of the day. And this includes the production of digestive secretions and, hormones that are involved with motility and really just a lot of things that are involved with the regulation of digestion at the end of the day. So if we are experiencing disruptions in an immediate sense and definitely in a prolonged sense as well to circadian rhythms, this is going to be a big problem or a big barrier when it comes to digestion, and it can be a big driver of bloating. So Abby kind of just touched on some of the really big things that are regulating and influencing circadian rhythm. So specifically meal timing, sleep and sleep timing, and then also light exposure. So if there is wonkiness with these things, then it is very normal to experience digestive symptoms, bloating included. So this is a really great thing to assess and just get a pulse on how these different habits are, supported in terms of, is the meal timing erratic? Is the sleep, quality or quantity not great? Is the light and dark exposure really wonky in terms of, not getting enough sunlight, getting way too much blue light and, bright light at times where we want to be, seeing mostly dark. Again, we talk about a lot of this in depth if this is kind of relevant for you in the circadian rhythm episode. But just to kind of highlight the importance of these factors in terms of, what could be driving bloating that is not related to the actual food that you're consuming.
And I feel like they all kind of like fit together. It's like that like circadian rhythm piece of like getting light exposure. And then you're like, oh, I should get outside. Oh, I should go for a walk maybe outside. I should, then like, oh, and then naturally we're kind of hungry for a lunch, for meals. And like, it's like when we start to think about it, you're like, oh, it's actually like a beautiful, just continuous, like kind of conversation where one leads into the next and things just work in this really nice rhythm and patterning.
And I think what you're describing with, a morning routine is actually a very phenomenal foundational place to start. It can often feel a little bit overwhelming if you're listening to an episode like this and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is off, that's off, this is off. Maybe start with the morning. A solid morning routine is going to anchor you for the day and have a ripple effect on digestion, blood sugar, energy, all the things. So maybe it's committing to just waking up and getting outside for that sunlight and a quick walk. From there, maybe it's having that, well-rounded meal that's going to sustain you for, 3-4 hours. And, bringing some mindfulness, to that experience and focusing on, chewing and all of the wonderful eating hygiene pieces. And then, kind of taking things from there.
That's like such a good point. And, in kind of conclusion, our greatest goal for the whole podcast, but really even for this episode is really to kind of create opportunities for us to kind of pause and like check in of, food is a big part of health, but it's not the only. And often I think many of the people that come into our kind of sphere are doing a lot with food. And there's a lot of conversations of like this, not that, and taking this out and restriction and elimination and things like that. And really like, what can we start to invite in? And I was like, picture like, I have so many clients, and I'm sure you do too, Jilly. They're like, well, now your voice is like in my head. And every time I do, whatever, they're like, I hear you. And I always picture us like if you shrink us down and just like put us in your pocket and like have us being like, chew your food, like get some sunlight. That's our big goal.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Put your phone down. Look at your food.
So we'll leave you with that. You can take us with you, shrink us down into Polly Pocket size, and we will be your like Polly Pocket, your body has your back support team.
I love it. Oh my gosh. People are going to have nightmares now.
I'm like, do we just end there now?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for our next episode where we will be talking about the food stuff and bloating.